Welcome back to Establish the Edge, where today we'll be going through this year's rookie quarterbacks as it pertains to both best ball and dynasty. And to do that, in my opinion, no one else better than the man who previously worked for the San Diego Chargers at the time, office and scouting department. Also, the man whose big board I suggest everyone should look at, given that in hindsight, it's typically one of the most accurate in the nation, and Underdog's Hayden Winks. And Hayden, and talking about these quarterbacks, that's where I want to start, because we were gifted last year and having, in my opinion, at least 4 multi-year starters: Drake May, Caleb Williams, Jaden Daniels, potentially JJ McCarthy, and then a couple others. We'll see what happens in Michael Penix, Bo Nix. But at the top of this year's class, Cam Ward seems to be the overall favorite to be drafted first wherever he may land. So how would you rank Cam Ward compared to that group of 6 I just mentioned?
So I had a first round grade on Bo Nix as well. That was kind of actually compared to the big board that you referenced. I was like one of the highest on Bo Nix. I didn't love Michael Penix. I actually had a round 2 grade on him, so we'll see how that one plays out. So for Cam Ward, I would put him right next to Bo Nix, kind of in that early round 1 grade. I probably actually like Cam Ward's tools a little bit more than Bo Nix's. So he's after Jaden, JJ McCarthy, and then Drake and Caleb to me. But I think he's got the tools to be the first overall pick. And when I do my big board, the top 100, he'll be my first overall player. I adjust for quarterback value, obviously, in that. So I think he is a worthy round 1 or first overall pick type. Is he the best first overall pick type? He's not, but he definitely has enough tools to get into that like top 10 NFL conversation.
I have not put out a mock draft on Establish the Run just yet, but in my opinion, the Titans do not sign both left tackle Dan Moore and Kevin Zeitler,
Yeah.
and ensuingly reshuffle their entire offensive line to not draft Cam Ward number 1 overall. Those are just my early thoughts.
Yep.
But you touched on his tools. Let's hear about some of those tools that you've seen in watching the tape.
Yeah, I share the same things with you for the first overall pick. If it's not the Titans, that means the Giants or somebody else is coming up to take Cam Ward, in my opinion. And by the way, the Titans, they weren't linked to another quarterback like the entire time. Like, there was another. There's multiple quarterbacks that were like begging for money, and the Titans didn't seem to be really in the market at all. So I think it's going to be Cam Ward to the Titans. In terms of just Ward, the player, you just see a creativity. You see different arm angles. He can throw the ball downfield. He has enough playmaking, which was interesting in that like he can scramble, but he also like looks to pass instead of actually scramble when he's breaking outside of the pocket. He's not like overwhelmingly huge. He's pretty dense at 6'2", so you're not worried about anything with that. But he's not like Josh Allen, Mahomes, Lamar Jackson in terms of how crazy of a playmaker he is. In most of the time, he's actually looking to pass the ball when he breaks out the pocket, then scramble. So the numbers are awesome. 95th percentile EPA per play. If you remove the RPOs, remove the screens, which I like to do with these prospects, 8.9 yards per drop back. That's very high compared to the rest of this class. You see some really downfield shots against cover 4, way over the top. And I think he can kind of do everything. The one weird thing, though, is he only had 3 zone read attempts. Like, you didn't see a bunch of like quarterback design stuff with Cam Ward. And for fantasy, like, we're going to need to see more of that at the next level. I'm guessing Miami was just like, he was so good at passing, like, let's just do that. But that was kind of the weird thing, because I think he can do that, but you just did not see that a whole lot at Miami.
We know the 3 stickiest metrics for quarterbacks transitioning to the pros are rushing, sacks, and turnovers. And I do think it's somewhat concerning that he had just over 30 career fumbles. Do you think that's a combination of the way he extends plays, handles the ball behind the line of scrimmage, or is it unfortunately, due to his smaller 9-inch hands, which are 6th percentile for his size?
Right. It's probably a combination of that. You do see Cam Ward when he is kind of extending a little bit of the Kyler Murray effect of like where the ball's kind of hanging out of pocket. So I think you have to take that with the pros and the cons. Like, there's some big plays that he makes because of that, and he'll also have to clean that up. In terms of like the scramble yards per drop back, second best in the class at 0.76. Jaxson Dart clears, but that's even ahead of Milroe, who we'll get to today, ahead of Shedeur Sanders. So he's a good scrambler. He's not a crazy scrambler. This is not Jaden Daniels, Lamar Jackson. It's none of that. It's just kind of like average in the NFL, maybe a little bit more behind a Titans offensive line that's they're trying out there. They've signed some guys, but we'll see how good it actually is. And then in terms of the sacks, he's also right in the middle of the pack in sack yards per drop back. Will Howard, Tyler Shuck are the best in the class. Then it's Cam Ward, and way down there is Shedeur Sanders, Quinn Ewers, Kyle McCord, those type of guys. So I didn't think the sacks were like a major problem for him, luckily. And that's kind of like a feather in his cap because he is like looking to extend plays, throw the ball downfield, throw the ball over the middle. And sometimes you have to hold on to the ball a little bit more than that. So I thought he like walked that balance like fairly well.
And we'll talk about the sacks being concerning for Shedeur Sanders when we get there. But because of the draft capital and the guaranteed starts we expect Ward to have, that's why, as it stands for Dynasty, he's currently the first quarterback off the board in rookie drafts. So in a rookie SuperFlex draft where we expect him to go in the top 5, top 6 picks, who are the players at any position that you would select before you take Cam Ward?
So for sure, Genty, he's phenomenal. And then to me, the only guys that are kind of in conversation would be Omarion Hampton and Tet McMillan, depending on landing spot and draft capital. But I think like the second you drop down to like Travion Henderson, Quinshon Judkins, like those guys were part-time players in college. I'm not sure if I want to be drafting like an early down guy or just a pass catching guy over somebody like Cam Ward, who like to me, like my comps for him, Jordan Love, Deshaun Watson. So like, we're getting out of that, like the S tier quarterbacks. We get into that second tier of guys, the Kyler Murray type of tier. I think that's kind of where Cam Ward is going to end up. The Titans landing spot isn't necessarily my favorite. I didn't like love what I saw from Callahan, like name the wide receiver too. Like they lost Nick Westbrook-Akine and like somehow that matters for the Titans right now. But if we're taking the dynasty angle, you would assume that they would get this thing ironed out. So landing spot wise, not my favorite, but if he does go first overall, that does guarantee a ton of starts, and they have nobody else to kind of fill in the gap as a rookie. So I think he's going to take off immediately, and I thought that he had enough tools to kind of overcome a pretty weak supporting cast. So
to be clear, Genty, and you said Tet McMillan?
Yeah, so I think Hampton, Tet, and Cam Ward would be my next tier of players. And I think obviously depends on if it's PPR, what the landing spots, all that type of stuff. But I think I'm not going to the tight ends ahead of Ward. I'm not going to the second tier of running backs. I think Golden and Emeka, those guys, Luther Burden for some people out there, I don't think I see enough high-end traits. And then obviously the other one would be Travis Hunter. If I got for sure Travis Hunter is going to be a full-time wide receiver, then sure, I would put him. He's so good at wide receiver. I'd put him ahead too. But for right now, I think it's Genty by himself, then the Hampton, Tet, and Ward by themselves, and then everybody else. I think we kind of figure that out once we get landing spots.
For as much as I like them, I also believe that Burden and a couple of those other guys you mentioned, the profiles are Matthew Golden are questionable enough to where I would much rather secure Cam Ward in that super flex option as opposed to then taking a shot on those guys, even though in a one quarterback league, I would easily take them ahead of Ward. And best ball, though, it's a different conversation because right now Ward is being drafted as a mid-range QB2 around guys like Bryce Young, Matthew Stafford. Bryce Young, who I honestly don't think is getting enough respect for the rushing juice he showed in the second half of last year. So I think he should be higher. But how are you handling Ward in underdog drafts right now, 20-round leagues? Because our own Justin Herzig is adamant that we should still be taking 3 quarterbacks this time of the year, since obviously a lot is going to happen since it's only March.
Yeah, I think that unfortunately I don't have like a strong take. I think his ADP is pretty accurate. Like I think Matthew Stafford's going to put up big numbers. Like you said, with Bryce was running a lot late down the stretch last year, and he looked much better. So I like his profile. Like Anthony Richardson, he's falling. I think he's one spot ahead of Cam Ward. I can easily see myself taking Cam Ward over Anthony Richardson just because of the like projected starts at this point with Daniel Jones in the building there. So I think for the most part, he's kind of in range. Now, I will say I would be okay like drafting another wide receiver, another running back, and then making Cam Ward my quarterback 2, and then like filling out the quarterback 3 with your Derek Carr type or something like that. If you go with like, let's say it's Kyler Murray, Cam Ward, and kind of be a little bit underweight on the quarterbacks, I think that's fine. If you want to just go Josh Allen plus Cam Ward, I'm okay with that because I think ultimately he's going to be projected to start almost every single game because I think he's going first overall. And the Giants don't have quarterback depth. The Titans don't have quarterback depth. The Browns don't have quarterback depth. And I think he's good enough to start immediately. I mean, he played 5 years. So I think he's ready to start immediately. And I think the ADP is totally fair.
Let's move on to Shedeur Sanders, who we're expecting to be the second quarterback off the board, perhaps to the Giants, but honestly, no one can really pinpoint the position right now. So, as our good friend and Sharp Football's Rich Rebar noted, Sanders' 7.3% sack rate led this class, which is concerning. It's the same concerns we had for Caleb Williams last year, because those types of things are drive killers. They're bad for ensuing points and then hitting that ceiling in best ball. So your overall thoughts on the tools Sanders is bringing to the NFL, and then do you think that he invites that sack rate by simply extending plays?
Right. I think his biggest problem is he drifts into pressure, and it's both retreating all the way back, and then you see like the left tackle and right tackle like are just letting these defensive ends go all the way around him. And all of a sudden those are sacks, where in the big leagues, like you got to stay in the pocket. He also drifts left to right, depending on which way he's throwing the ball. You rarely see it being like 3-step, 5-step, the ball's out right on time. You see a little bit more funkiness out of the pocket. And like, I thought he ran himself into trouble. At the same time, Colorado's offensive line was a disaster. Like, that narrative for sure is true. He, at the same time, though, he was also throwing to Travis Hunter, who is sensational as a wide receiver. And even the depth guys, the Colorado wide receivers, I thought those guys were all pretty good. He also threw a lot of screens in this offense, like a ton of screens. So if you just like would have filtered out all the screens where you're not getting sacked on a damn screen, then that sack rate even goes higher, because a larger majority of his dropbacks were just actually screens. So I do think the sack problem is a really big one. The other thing is he's not very dense and strong in the pocket. So I think some sacks, like the Anthony Richardson, like when he was coming out, his sack rate was like incredible. And everyone's like, oh, that's just because he's such a good decision maker, gets the ball quick. When I was watching him, like, he's too big to tackle. Like, this is the NFL. It's kind of like the Ben Roethlisberger effect. Like, if you're 250 pounds, guess what? You're a little bit harder to sack. Shedeur Sanders put on a little bit of weight going into the combine, but I still think that's a problem. And then the other thing is he's not a crazy athlete. Like, he can dance a little bit. He's got a little bit of a shimmy, but he's not super explosive in terms of his actual speed and burst. So there's sometimes where you try to get outside the pocket and then he would just get chased down. So I think the sack problem will be even a bigger problem in the NFL. And that's what has me nervous, because I'm not sure if he has enough high-end tools to make up for the difference. So I think he's a good processor in terms of just like getting the ball out to the second level, willing to throw the ball over the middle of the field. He's very accurate. But in terms of like the creativity and all the negative plays, like that's where I have a lot of concerns with Shedeur.
You touched on the screens, but he was operating Pat Shurmur's offense, which is an NFL style scheme. So do you think that'll help him transition seamlessly, or is that called pelting at the line of scrimmage? Is that something that will hinder him?
I didn't see a bunch of NFL stuff from that offense. I know it was Pat Shurmur. They had like NFL guys on the sideline, like Warren Sapp's out there, obviously Dion. They've got a lot of NFL guys. The problem is, and like you hear about this with the Travis Hunter stuff, is Travis Hunter was in all the defensive meetings and then he would play all the offensive snaps. So you see a lot of like turning to the sideline, getting the play call in. You don't see any under center from Shedeur Sanders really at all. A lot of screens to get the ball out quickly. And then in terms of like what plays they're running, you see this like big crossing route over and over and over again. You see some like back shoulder fades of Travis Hunter, like contested catch situation stuff. You see a lot of screens. Like you don't really see like a lot of like backside digs and stuff like you see in the NFL under center play action. You don't really see that in this offense. So to me, like the people that are like, he's such a good processor, his accuracy is so good, he can start immediately. I don't know. Like, to me, I see somebody that like I think should probably hold a clipboard for a little bit, because they didn't run that many plays at Colorado, and so much of it was just screens, where I think you could start him, but I can see him struggling a bit trying to figure out the pocket that he can actually survive in, and then also just having a bigger variety of plays. So like in that, it could be like a rookie season Bryce Young situation, who I thought had the same issues, where not enough physical traits, and you have this kind of retreating effect, and all of a sudden things aren't working out in your favor. And I like Bryce Young's tape a lot more than Shedeur's coming out.
Brings me to a quick tangent, because I've asked everyone that's come on the show so far, and we've all had different opinions. Herzig wants to be significantly behind Travis Hunter's 10th round ADP on Underdog. I want to be slightly ahead, as well as Leone does. And Amico wants to be also well ahead. How do you want to handle right now Travis Hunter in the 10th round?
So I don't think he's going to the Titans at this point.
Mhm.
I We have the Browns who said that he would be a wide receiver. I think that's in play because I think if I don't think they're going to take Shedeur Sanders personally. I think if you just like look at the Shedeur Sanders kind of people that are actually releasing their grades after watching him, you see a lot of round 2 grades and not like a lot of like he should go top 5 grades. In fact, like I'm searching for anybody to like pound the table for Shedeur Sanders up that high, but I see him in the mock draft. So I think there's a chance he goes to the Browns. I think there's a chance he goes to the Giants. And if you are the Giants, like, are you really going to play him at corner? Like, you need some wide receivers over there as well. So I think really to me, it's the Browns and the Giants are the most likely landing spots. And I guess if he goes to the Patriots, that would be a little bit surprising to me, but I think that they would also have to consider him at wide receiver. So if I knew for a fact he was a wide receiver, I think that 4th, 5th round in best ball would be fair to him. I would put the odds of that happening around 50%. I think that he's going to get enough out there. So I think his ADP ultimately is about fine. I think the fact that the Titans are no longer a Travis Hunter team, it looks like, I think that actually increases his value because the Browns did openly say, like, we want to use his ball skills. And I do think right now, like, Abdul Carter versus Travis Hunter for them, I think that would be a worthwhile discussion.
That's why I believe he's the most polarizing player right now in pre-draft best ball. But for Shedeur Sanders, are you treating him similarly in underdog drafts to Cam Ward as a rookie you're tacking on in 3 QB builds?
I don't think I really want that much Shedeur Sanders, to be
Okay.
honest. Yeah, I think that even as a rookie, if he does get enough starts, like let's say he does go in the top 10, like I think the Saints are like a good kind of middle tier, like where if we have to get past the blue chippers, which to me it's Travis Hunter and Abdul Carter. If he slides beyond that tier, and then all of a sudden you're getting into these edge rushers with no sack production or off ball linebacker types, and the Saints want to say, let's take the ride. I'm not sure how many starts he would get the further he goes down the board, and I think that's fairly likely. So I think I would rather just take the guys that I feel pretty comfortable are going to start the entire season, or just pay the premium in getting Cam Ward, who I think just has a lot more upside. Shedeur Sanders, I do not think is going to be like a really impactful like rushing yards guy. I think he's going to like do it enough. I don't think he's going to even be average in that category. I don't think that you're going to use his body type in like the designed uh, carries game, and I think he'll scramble a little bit. But I think he's going to want to try to get the ball out quickly, almost like trying to like cosplay like as like a Joe Burrow type. And I'm not sure how much scrambling his body can kind of hold up on.
Someone I think will actually have more scrambling juice for fantasy points than Sanders is Jaxson Dart, the last of the 3 quarterbacks we expect to be taken in the first round, perhaps, and get starts in year 1. I do want to hear your overall thoughts on Dart, but first, do you have any concerns that, similar to Matt Corral running Lane Kiffin's Ole Miss offense,
Yep.
Corral, when he came out, led the FBS with 60% of his dropbacks from play action. This year, Dart, 53% of his dropbacks came from play action, the highest rate of this class. Do you have any concerns that it's because like both of these players' production was inflated because they're running a gimmicky offense?
Oh yeah. I mean, in terms of inflated, sure. Like Lane Kiffin had so many guys wide open here. I will say a lot of it was like down the field. And like I think that Lane Kiffin was comfortable with Jaxson Dart's arm strength and arm talent in general and aggressive nature. I'd have to go back to probably what's worthwhile doing, comparing like the EPA and the numbers from Corral to Dart. But just in terms of just this year's class, Jaxson Dart, this is net yards per dropback. So we're adjusting for sacks here. No RPOs, no screams. So like none of like the actual bullshit stuff. Like he's at least progressing to some degree. Jaxson Dart, number 1 in the class, 9.7 yards.
Wow.
Number 2, Cam Ward, 9.4. Then you get to teardrops, and Shedeur Sanders down there at 7.3. Tyler Shuck at 7.1. Quinn Ewers, all those guys, even in the 6s. So Dart and Ward by themselves. Then you get to everybody else. So I think it's a little bit difficult because there are some guys running wide open. You do see more first read throws on Jaxson Dart's tape, but you also see somebody that can scramble a ton. And we'll get to those numbers in a second. And then he's also willing to throw the ball over the middle in tight window situations, which causes some trouble, certainly. But those are also the throws you have to be willing to hit in the NFL if you're actually going to be a needle mover. And his like accuracy on those are pretty sweet. And he definitely has enough arm talent to sneak those in there. So he's not a perfect player. I have a round 1 grade on him. I'm not sure how many round 1 grades we're going to get on him once we get to the consensus rankings. But if the Steelers picked him at 21, wouldn't be surprised. If the Browns took him at 33, wouldn't be a surprise. So I think that he's live for some starts this year. But there will be a little bit of an adjustment period because you see a lot of like staring down the sideline pre-snap in the Lane Kiffin offense. Don't see that much under center either. So I thought they kind of tinkered the offense a little bit with a lot more downfield shots because I thought Jaxson Dart was able to handle that.
Daniel Jeremiah in his most recent mock had Jaxson Dart number 21 overall to the Steelers. I don't know if that's something he heard or because, like the rest of us, he looks at their depth chart after giving DK Metcalf $150 million and says, there's no way you are rolling out Mason Rudolph and that's it as your starter in 2025. But I do think if that's the case, if that is the home, it's sexy given Dart's class high 11.9 yard ADOT. We need someone to throw those deep shots to both Metcalf and Pickens. For Dart, though, you touched on it. We think he could provide that rushing juice over Sanders. So what do you see in the running game here for fantasy?
Well, down the stretch, you saw him really take off. That was like against SEC competition. Last 4 games, he averaged 61 rushing yards per game. If you just look at like the total rushing EPA compared to all the drafted quarterbacks going back to 2005, he's in the 67th percentile. He scrambled 40 times. He took 29 sacks, which you want to see more scrambles and sacks, and he clears that threshold a lot. But you saw like a lot of like quarterback draw, quarterback power, a little bit of zone read with Jaxson Dart. He's a thick build. He's not super like tall like Josh Allen, but he's a dense guy, and they utilized him like a lot. And then he scrambled and he would actually run by some guys, SEC linebacker types. So I think he's like a plus in the scramble department. I think he's going to get utilized with the quarterback designed run game as well. He kind of reminds me of Bo Nix a little bit, where like all of a sudden like you sort by next gen stats and the miles per hour runs, and like Bo Nix is hitting like 21 miles per hour. And he scrambled around a little bit, and that obviously elevated him to be like a low end quarterback 1 by the end of the season. There's a little bit of Bo Nix in him. He's not the processor that Bo Nix was, in my opinion. Baker Mayfield, Sam Darnold, like that's where you kind of get the like a little bit sporadic, but can throw the ball downfield. And I think that Jaxson Dart has a little bit more scrambling ability. So yeah, I think it's going to take some time just going back to the Lane Kiffin offense, but like I see the path to him being an NFL starter. I'm just trying to figure out which team was actually going to take on that risk.
A player like Justin Fields with his rushing upside last year goes in the last round of best ball drafts, and then he pays that off despite only starting 6 games because, as he's shown us in the past, he hit a couple of overall QB1 scoring weeks to return that investment in the last round. Do you see that with Jaxson Dart in 3 QB builds, or is an outcome like Drake May, where on the season, May finishes the QB 15 in points per game, but still provided a handful of top 12 weeks, not overall QB1, but top 12. Is that worthy of a last round pick in 3 QB builds right now? Or do you see something where Dart actually hits a higher ceiling than May did?
I thought May was a significantly better prospect. Now he was also attached to whatever New England, whatever you want to call that.
Hell they're doing?
Cast. Yeah. So that's like the difficult part, because if he slides in the draft and ends up with the Steelers or something like that, that can be pretty decent. So I would guess that his landing spot's going to be better than whatever New England was trotting out last year. But I don't think that Dart and Drake May are comparable, because I thought Drake May had just a little bit more command in the pocket, kind of knew where he was going. You saw a little bit more progression with him. And also he's just a bigger, better athlete than Jaxson Dart. So he's probably somewhere in the middle of that. I do think if Dart gets some starts, I would rather have him than some of the other guys like Derek Carr types, just because I think he'll make up the difference with the scrambling. So he's firmly on my 3 quarterback radar. And if you told me Jaxson Dart versus Shedeur Sanders, they're both getting 14 starts, I'll take my chances with Jaxson Dart.
In a 4 to 5 round, 1 QB rookie draft, I would argue the 3 players we just discussed are the only QBs worth drafting, given the depth at running back and wide receiver this year. You have to reserve your shots in rookie drafts for those particular players. But in a super flex league or at the end of the fourth, around the fifth, if your roster does have room for that second quarterback, a developmental piece, then I think the next player you look to at the end is Jalen Milroe because of what he provides on the ground. And I know also you're quite high on Milroe as a developing player.
Yeah, I think this is a really good point. To be honest, I have zero confidence in his draft capital. I do
Mhm.
know that he has experience with the Browns, new play caller and Tommy Reese. They have the 33rd overall pick, and like that has my interest a little bit. But I
And
also,
Myles Garrett also in his press conference mentioned
Mhm.
that he re-signed, one of the many reasons because the Browns had a plan at
Right.
quarterback. I don't know if that plan includes Jalen Milroe, if that would actually then lead Garrett to re-signing, but apparently they have something cooking.
Yeah, that was interesting, and Milroe did come to mind with me. Like that's like kind of like football 301, looking at trying to connect some dots, and maybe we're overthinking this, and this is actually IQ 80 brain going into us. But yeah, in terms of Milroe, the prospect, first of all, like everybody loves him. Like military family, just a locker room guy, puts in the work, obviously, in the weight room. But man, it is like you cannot overstate how good of an athlete he is. Like we say this about a lot of guys. He would be like the best athlete on the field for many games. I think he would run the 4 3s. He is massively built. He would basically be Lamar Jackson and Jaden Daniels tier of a rushing quarterback. He's denser than those two guys as well. He's phenomenal now. Like they're like Malachi Starks is going to go round 1 in the draft, most likely a safety out of Georgia. There's plays where Jalen Milroe, it does not even look like they're playing the same sport, just running right by these guys. Like it is impressive running right by corners. It's honestly it's wild to see some of the game breaking plays he makes. So I do not think we can overstate that. And for fantasy purposes, that is largely what matters. Like to me, he would be Justin Fields, if not kind of like maybe even plus beyond that. But I think we're talking about that tier of rushing production. And then I thought he processed a little bit better than people are giving him credit for. Now, he has some mechanical issues. There are some plays where he's obviously not playing in rhythm. I think some mechanics with his throwing motion are at fault there. By the way, when you're watching Alabama, this is not the same Alabama team. Like, look at the wide receivers. Like, they had that freshman who was phenomenal, but they're throwing to tight ends that look like fullbacks. They're throwing to like these wide receiver 2 guys, which are not round 1 prospects. So this is not the same caliber Alabama team. Even the offensive line wasn't as good. So this was just like a down year for Alabama. I don't think like all of that should go on Jalen Milroe. Like there was a couple games down the stretch where he was the best player on the field. Like he single handedly won some games at Alabama for a not as good of a team as we're used to from the Crimson Tide. So I saw him get to checkdowns a lot better than a lot of quarterbacks I watched. I did like that. But what's scary about this is I don't see a lot of other people sharing this opinion with me. I do know that like Nate Tice earlier in the season did like what he see. Then he went through a really rough patch, and then I think that he had a couple of good games down the stretch. So we'll see what happens. I don't think that he's live to start that many games as a rookie. But if I was running a front office and he was available in round 3, I would for sure take him. And I will not discredit any team that takes a second round swing on him. But we'll see where he goes. I can see other teams saying he's a day 3 guy.
The wild range of draft capital is why we can't get there in best ball. But for super flex drafts, I already mentioned where I think he should be going. Do you have any thoughts on his range there?
Yeah, I think what you just said was pretty spot on. I think we're gonna have this. I'll just say this: the second we get the draft capital, be ready to make a huge jump in where you're ranking him. Like if the baseline is he's only going to be a backup, he went in round 4, then sure, like he has basically no value. We don't see many quarterbacks get start in that tier. If he goes to the Browns in the second round or somebody like the Jets in round 2 to back up Justin Fields. Like to me, I think that Jalen Milroe's processing is already better than Justin Fields. Like, I think that in a quarterback competition between the two, Milroe would get starts by the end of the year. So I would just say be ready to completely change your expectation from him. Last couple notes on him: 7.9 yards per dropback when removing the RPOs and screens. So that's above Shedeur Sanders. He did this against SEC competition. He had 83rd percentile QBR, 63rd percentile EPA per play among drafted quarterbacks. So he passes like some of the thresholds that we're looking for. And then in terms of like arm strength, there's nobody better in this class. Like he can just sit there without even hitching up into the pocket and throw the ball to the other side of the field, 60 yards downfield, right on the money. So yeah, you can create a low light reel from him. You can also create a highlight reel from him. So it just kind of depends on the landing spot. But I would really hope that he goes round 2 and gets some starts.
Anthony Amico also very high on Milroe if you look at our dynasty calculator right now. For the other guys, the rest of them, Tyler Shaw, Will Howard, Quinn Ewers, the list goes on. It's just hard to discuss them because we speak of Milroe's wild range of capital.
Mm-hmm.
It's very similar to these other guys. And I think that's how we're handling this, where it's just really tough to talk about them in depth because we don't know. And honestly, there's not any other rumors besides the low-hanging fruit of Ewers to back up Dak Prescott and the Cowboys.
Oh, man, that would be tragic. I haven't watched Ewers specifically, but I've watched a bunch of Texas because they have a lot of prospects the last couple of years, and I've not been very impressed. I agree with you, man. Like you look at the consensus rankings, there is no consensus ranking on these quarterbacks. You try to find some analysts that have like Tyler Shuck as like a top 5 guy, and that's kind of where I landed up, but I see Will Howard love. I see Kyle McCord love. I see Ewers love. It's really hard to tell. And I think for most of these guys, you're not seeing a bunch of rushing production. So in terms of like the fantasy angle with these guys, it's going to be tough to kind of get there. I mean, my favorite so far has been Tyler Shuck, and I would not be surprised if he went round 2 just because of he's kind of like a throwbacky quarterback who's got enough speed, 4.63 speed, but he kind of reminded me of like Jared Goff, Ryan Tannehill, Mason Rudolph, like that kind of tier. And I can see somebody that wants to throw the ball over the middle and downfield, under center, play action, bootleg, all that type of stuff. And he's 6'5". I can see some team falling in love with that style, where like with McCord and Will Howard and those guys, I don't see like a standout trait that you can like kind of separate all these guys. I would put in Quinn Ewers into that discussion too. So if I had to pick a name out of this bucket, to me, it's for sure Tyler Shuck.
First of all, I am professional and did my job and looked up the pronunciation, but I swear to you, the pronunciation guy told me Shao. It is Shuck though.
Yeah, I've never been confident in this. I heard Todd
just like A Chain, right? We had to correct all the pronunciation. Moving on, I swore it was Shao, but I am admitting I could be wrong.
Yeah, I think it's Shuck.
Okay,
but yeah, he's doing himself no favors with that last name. I think that's one of the reasons why he's so forgettable is in terms of just like his hype right now is because of the name. But yeah,
he's also forgettable because he'll be 26 in September. Let's start there, a 26-year-old rookie. But unlike Bo Nix, who was the older prospect, Bo Nix, of course, who had 1,900 collegiate pass attempts, Shuck in his 7-year career finished with 951 due to many season-ending injuries. And so, like you, I think that's the one worth speculating on because he does have some late first round, day 2 buzz, and that's capital we should talk about. So you already said you have some notes on Shuck beyond what you've already mentioned. Go ahead.
Right. So the injuries aren't that catastrophic. Like he broke his collarbone twice, and then he had like an ankle injury for the other injury. So we're not talking about like this guy is like never going to be able to run again, and like he's all these knee injuries and stuff. Like a clavicle, like you can return from a clavicle. I'm sorry. So I think bad timing. He didn't beat out Justin Herbert at Oregon. Okay, like he can start explaining.
That's also a telling sign how old he is, that he backed up Justin Herbert for a couple of years.
For sure. So yeah, I wrote in my notes, he's got like a mid 2010 style of quarterbacking, like your Phillip Rivers types. Like you just see him, and he's 6'5", 225 pounds. Like that's to me what stands out. And that's why I think there's going to be a couple teams that like just like see the vision. And you see some perimeter throws, you see some intermediate throws, you see the backside dig throws, you see some under center bootleg, and you just don't watch a lot of quarterbacks run that style of offense in college right now. So to me, he just like stands out in the fact that he's just not always in shotgun RPOing himself to death, and that the fact that he went out there and had 4.63 speed. There's some plays where he's throwing on the run that are beautiful. There's also some plays where he's about to take contact, and you can kind of see him shrivel up. And I think that's ultimately going to be his biggest red flag beyond the age and some of the injuries that we're talking about. But I don't know, like 6'5" could play in pro style offense and has 4.63 speed, like to me, that's like enough to kind of get him in the day 2 conversation. So we'll see if he goes round 2, or we'll see if he ends up being a 3rd or 4th round pick. I don't know what the ultimate like medical concerns are going to be for him, but like on the surface, like a couple broken collarbones multiple years ago, I don't think it's like the biggest red flag.
But to be clear, assuming both are taken end of day 2 or day 3, it would still in your mind for fantasy be Jalen Milroe over Tyler Shough.
Oh yeah, I think Milroe clears for sure. But I can see Shough getting some starts eventually. I don't know if that'd be as a rookie, but I can see him kind of meeting that threshold where he's a quality backup, and that some team kind of sees the vision with him, like kind of the Kirk Cousins factor, where he's just like always just kind of in the mix, and then we'll see what he can do from there. So I thought he made enough throws on the perimeter that caught my eye, and he just did it in a different style. And almost gave me like a nostalgic vibe, because you watch 10 quarterbacks and he's the only guy that plays like this. So we'll see if that's the league's just moved on past that to style quarterback, or if there's a couple teams that are like, you know what, I want to run this. Like if he was a Lions backup in round 3, like that would not surprise me.
And with that, Hayden, I know you and Josh Norris over at the Underdog YouTube channel have also been putting out prospect profiles, in-depth videos with cut-ups of every player. Where else can everyone find your work?
Yeah, so we just finished up and are continuing on with running backs right now. I think next week we're going to get into wide receivers. I'll have my top 100 big board and some writing on Underdog Network, but the good stuff's over on YouTube channel. It's fun. Josh and I, we don't compare notes before the show. And then sometimes we have this basically the same notes. And that means you can feel pretty confident in that that's what the player is going to be after us watching the games individually. Or sometimes there's a differentiating opinions, and then you can kind of see who had the better take there. So I think that's kind of the fun part, is we have no idea what each other's going to say. And then sometimes we disagree, and then sometimes we agree.
And if you have any questions about what we discussed and getting in range to take one of these quarterbacks in your rookie drafts coming up, then Anthony Amico is also working around the clock to make sure the ETR Dynasty calculator available on the site is constantly up to date. Until then, we will be back next week with our running back rankings, expecting it to be a long, in-depth episode. So until then, remember, be a little bit kinder than what's required. We'll see you next time.